If you aren't already familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the War Scroll is a great one to start with, since it is both the most recognized and yet the least understood. The contents of the War Scroll are quite unique and descriptive. It seems to detail a final end times battle between the righteous, legitimate priests called the Sons of Light and the wicked, illegitimate priests called the Sons of Darkness. The light and darkness imagery likely is not only to communicate a spiritual truth, but also to refer back to the solar and lunar calendar differences between the two groups of Pharisees and Essenes. As I show in my book, The Lost Prophecies of Qumran, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, the illegitimate priests followed a pagan lunar calendar, while the sons of Zadok followed the solar calendar given by God from the beginning of creation. The sons of Zadok would be known as Essenes, and the illegitimate priests were known as Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, in the War Scroll, angels are also participating in this war, siding with the Sons of Light. They are actually fighting by praying, worshiping, and blowing trumpets. We see the spiritual warfare side of the battle with the angels alongside the physical warfare side of the battle with the human agents. Physical and spiritual warfare are occurring at the same time within the same final prophetic end times war. Already we can picture Old and New Testament passages explaining the end times battle of Armageddon that is set to occur at the return of Jesus Christ. Amazingly, quotes from the War Scroll may appear in the New Testament. Right after the Sons of Light win the war against the Sons of Darkness, the War Scroll states, "And the sons of justice shall shine in all the edges of the earth. They shall go on illuminating up to the end of all the periods of darkness." The War Scroll 1:8a. In the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus is explaining the parable of the tares, in which the sons of the wicked one are likened to tares among wheat, or righteous ones, he says that angels, as well as humans, will be involved in this battle. When this battle is won for the side of the righteous, he says, "Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear." Matthew 13:43 KJV. The events of the War Scroll and the events of the end times battle as detailed by Jesus go hand in hand and actually appear to refer to the same battle, even using some of the same descriptions. Jesus may have been quoting from the War Scroll in this verse. And if true, that leads us to wonder how many of his followers would have been familiar with the War Scroll and other Dead Sea Scrolls. Perhaps the texts kept at the library in Qumran were far more well known during the first century in Israel than most today would think. Even more, the last line in the Matthew passage describing the hearing of those who have ears might be a signal to pay special attention. Something bigger may be at play here. A mystery may need to be discovered. When Jesus was recounting how the world or age would end, we must remember there were three main schools of thought: the Pharisee, Sadducee, and Essene. These three interpretations of eschatology certainly did not agree, and in fact were vastly different. There is no doubt that Jesus' listeners would have been wondering which interpretation was actually correct, just as we might wonder which modern prophetic interpretation is correct if Jesus was giving a parable today. If he was referencing the War Scroll here, it may have been a way for him to say the Essene interpretation was correct. Sort of like saying, if you're willing to accept it, pay attention to what I'm saying because it falls in line with Essene theology, but if you have already decided to reject Essene interpretation, then you will not be open to understanding what I'm telling you. Now, another way the War Scroll is similar to the words of Jesus recorded in the Gospel of Matthew is in its description of this future time. It will be a time of suffering for all the people redeemed by God. Of all their sufferings, none will be like this, from its haste until eternal redemption is fulfilled. The War Scroll, 1:11b through 12a. Like this, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." Matthew 24:21 KJV. It's interesting that both the War Scroll and chapter 24 of the Gospel of Matthew record that this will be a time of suffering, not just for wicked people, but for those redeemed by God, called elect in Matthew 24:22. And in fact, according to the War Scroll, this final battle, which is probably Armageddon since it appears only the unfaithful are slain in line 8 of column 3, that this battle lasts a lot longer than we typically think. During the 35 years of service, the way will be prepared during 6 years, and all the congregation together will prepare it, and the war of divisions will take place during the remaining 29 years. The War Scroll 2, 9b through 10a. Could the 6 years be the first 6 years of the tribulation, with the Battle of Armageddon beginning in the 7th year and continuing for 29 more? As we saw in the book of Enoch's Apocalypse of Weeks prophecy that we dealt with in a previous video, there was a 6-year difference between the middle of the 2nd week and the birth of Noah. Noah was born in 1056 AM. Now, note that the halfway point between 700 and 1400 is 1050. The year 1050 AM is exactly the halfway point of week 2. If week 9 has the same thing happening, could those 6 years of preparation be described in the War Scroll, and could that account for this discrepancy? We typically think that when Jesus returns, he will take care of everything at that exact moment. But when we read through the prophetic texts of the Bible, as I detail in full in my book, The Lost Prophecies of Qumran, we discover that the timing is not so simple. If the end of the age occurs in 2075, as the Essenes taught, 35 years before that is 2040. If the tribulation were to begin in 2040, 6 years to prepare the war would bring us to 2046, and then 29 years after that would be 2075. Now, we don't really know from biblical texts alone exactly how long this battle lasts. If it is a longer battle, however, it would stand to reason that there would also be a sooner rapture. For example, if the rapture were to occur in 2025, there could be another 15 years until the tribulation officially begins in 2040. We don't actually know how much time is between the rapture and the start of the tribulation if you're a pre-trib rapture believer, as I am, and if not, don't worry, you're still going to find this information incredibly helpful. And I do explore that question in full in my book, The Lost Prophecies of Qumran. Now, of course, all of this is contingent on the War Scroll describing the Battle of Armageddon, which we have no real way of knowing if it is or not. It could be Armageddon, it could be Gog or Magog, it could be the final battle after the 1,000-year reign of Christ, could be some other war, whether biblically prophesied or not. Could be something else entirely, or it could be a combination of some or all of these things. We don't even know if these 35 years in the War Scroll are meant to be understood as consecutive or split into different sections with lengths of time in between. This is how the 70 weeks of Daniel are described, so it's possible the same kind of thing is happening in the War Scroll. It could be telling of many wars throughout Israel's history and future, for all we know. Now, while not knowing might frustrate some, for me, I find it really exciting. It opens new possibilities to explore. While we might not know exactly how many, it does seem that the War Scroll refers to at least 2 different battles. In my opinion, it doesn't only reference the Battle of Armageddon, but also the battle at the end of the 1,000-year reign of Jesus, when Satan is let loose from his prison in the abyss and is then finally done away with forever. We can see this expressed in another passage of the War Scroll that has commonalities with the New Testament. You shall carry out sentence on Gog and on all his gathering, for you shall wage war against them from the heavens. The War Scroll 11:16-17. The War Scroll right after this relates that God has the names of his followers in a book, which will be important in trying to identify which end times battle is being described. The book of Revelation states, "And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them." Revelation 20:7-9 KJV. First, we can point out the similarities in these passages. When we look to the book of Ezekiel, we don't find all the elements in Revelation. So this leads us to ask where John, the writer of Revelation, might be pulling some of the references from. Now, of course, God is showing all of these things to John in a vision, so it could just be as simple as that. However, if John was familiar with the War Scroll, he may have already been aware of these elements and may have pulled from them to help explain what he was seeing. This could suggest why we don't see elements from Revelation in Ezekiel, but we do find those elements in the War Scroll. Of course, opinions are currently split on whether the Gog and Magog War of Ezekiel is the same thing as the Battle of Armageddon. Others have posited the Gog and Magog War might be the same as the one after the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Some believe it is one or the other, or even a different war entirely. However, Ezekiel aside, it does seem these specific passages in Revelation and the War Scroll are both talking about the battle after the 1,000-year reign of Christ. In the War Scroll and Revelation, we see mention of Gog, a gathering of enemy forces around the righteous, and God fighting against the wicked from heaven. Also, at this point, we can be confident that the War Scroll is referencing the battle after the 1,000-year reign of Christ and no longer the Battle of Armageddon because of the mention of a book of names right after describing the judgment of God from out of heaven against the enemy. You have established for yourself in the book of the names of all their armies is with you in your holy dwelling, in the dwelling of your glory. The War Scroll 12:2. In the book of Revelation, right after the verse about God sending fire down to destroy the enemy, we're given a description of the great white throne judgment, which also mentions books and names. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Revelation 20:12 and 15, KJV. Given the same progression of mention in both passages, first the fighting of God against the enemy from out of heaven, then the book and names, we can safely assume these two passages describe the same event, the battle at the end of Christ's millennial reign, followed by the reading of the book of names at the great white throne judgment. This means the War Scroll seems to be accounting for at least two wars, the Battle of Armageddon and the final war after the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Other wars might be described as well. So we can't be too dogmatic about using this text to try to pinpoint the length of time between the rapture, tribulation, the return of Christ, and the beginning of the Kingdom Age. What I have just shared with you is only a glimpse into what I reveal in my new book, The Lost Prophecies of Qumran. Who could have known how much influence the writings of a mysterious group of prophets and scribes hundreds of years before Christ would have on our understanding of end times prophecy? As it turns out, much of what we've been taught about first century Israel is incomplete. There were, in fact, Jewish believers who knew exactly what to expect in the coming Messiah, that he would be God in the flesh and would die for our sins. If they accurately predicted the first arrival of Jesus, what did they say about his soon return? In this groundbreaking book, you will learn how an ancient Jewish calendar actually predicts the year 2025 AD as prophetically significant, how the enigmatic group known as the Essenes formed, and what influence they had over the New Testament. Lost prophecies only recently discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls about our time today. What messages the Essenes left behind for believers living in this present age. How the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation fit within the ancient Essene timetable. What hidden feasts and festivals the Essenes observed and what they point to in the future. The circumstances of the Essenes' disappearance and how it connects to every Christian from the past 2,000 years to the present day. Once you learn about the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls they left behind, you will understand the entirety of the Bible in a brand new light. Finally, the prophetic texts of Scripture can be understood as originally intended. So click the link below to order your digital copy of The Lost Prophecies of Qumran, or go to sidroth.org/Peck to discover what God is revealing in these final years of our current age, and what is ahead in the next age soon to come.